This is the Compass Podcast, where we tune in to the divine that's present in the everyday, including in our natural world. My name is Ryan Dunn, and this past weekend I did something I've not done in a while. I skipped the Sunday morning church thing, and my wife and I went for a hike. And while taking a break with my toes dangling in a cool pool of water next to a little waterfall here in Middle Tennessee, I felt a sense of appreciation and gave some words of thanks for all that was good in my world at that moment. Was that worship? Yeah, albeit a small act of worship, but it was nonetheless a moment in which I expressed some thanks and praise for the good works of a creator. You've probably encountered moments like this too. In this episode of Compass, Victoria Loorz shares how we can cultivate such moments and how these moments have led her and a whole bunch of people into a church-based movement to enjoy, appreciate, and connect with the divine through reflecting and experiencing the natural world. It's the wild side of church on this episode of Compass. Now, Victoria Loorz is a wild church pastor. She's an eco-spiritual director and co-founder of several transformation-focused organizations focused on the integration of nature and spirituality. So let's hear her story here on Compass. Let's start with the macro of some of the things that you've been up to over the last few years. What is Church of the Wild?
That's a great place to begin. So Church of the Wild is kind of a work of the Spirit, actually. When I first envisioned it, I thought it was just my own little crazy idea. But it was something that had been boiling up within me, churning within me, that our disconnection from the rest of the natural world has not only a huge impact on the way we treat the world, that is evidenced by the crisis that she's in, but also impacts our spirituality and our religious life. And as I was holding those two, I was an associate pastor at the time, and every time I preached, I'd preach something about it. And every time I did that, I'd go deeper and deeper into, our own sacred stories to see that this disconnection of our spirituality from nature is something that is not, laid out in our sacred stories, in our scriptures. In fact, the more I looked into it, the more I had eyes that could see, shall we say, that it's deeply woven into probably every religious foundation, but definitely I was finding within the Judeo-Christian story that every single spiritual leader from both testaments were sent into the wilderness on purpose by God in these stories. And it was more than, I used to preach as a minister of what I call now an indoor church. I used to, preach that those wilderness times were kind of like dark nights of the soul or something like that, testing times, trial times. And I have a totally different understanding of it now, that there is some purpose. I was asking that question. What is the reason that that being drawn into the wilderness was so important for these leaders, every single one of them in different ways? But there's something foundational about the actual wilderness herself, not just, that they weren't around civilization, but that they were drawn into relationship with the wilderness, with the soil and the waters and the mountains and the fiery bushes, that it was a relational, the prepositions used are very relational, into relationship kind of. Yes, they were locational about where it would happen, but it was also into relationship with the sacred. It wasn't just, that's both into relationship with the actual waters and with the sacred voice there.
That is startling, because so often when we look at those wilderness experiences, say Jesus's 40 days in the wilderness before he started public ministry, we think of that in terms of isolation, right?
Right.
Like part of the temptation, even we might call it isolation, but you're saying that is actually just like a reframing of relationship with the world?
I'm saying that for sure. And I think that the scriptures are saying that. We just haven't had the ears to hear it. And, so in my book, Church of the Wild, I go into that a little bit. And let me just give one example.
Yeah, please.
As after I had started, I haven't answered your question yet, by the way. I will get back to it. But after I did start, maybe how can I remember that? I'm going to go back and answer that second question. I'm really good at interrupting myself.
Join the club. Yeah, that's okay. That's what I'm here to keep you on task. So
okay,
we'll get there.
I'm going to answer the first question, and then I wrote down so I won't forget where I want to go. So after exploring this for a few years, I started to realize the damage that we experienced, or that there's a damaging effect of this dislocation of our spirituality only being sort of like disembodied and not grounded and not in relationship with the rest of the, what I call beloved community. It's like the beloved community expands beyond our church and our race and our species. We are the beloved community on this planet. So I started in 2015. I just said, all right, I'm going to just do this. I'm just going to leave this indoor church. There's a group of people that gathered around me and said, we want to do this thing you've been talking about. So I was starting to explore what it would be like to do church in relationship with the rest of the natural world. And so it's not just doing what we do indoors, only outside, like at Easter Sunday or something. It's really, it's a revisioning and a restoration of deep relationship with the sacred in relationship with our place. And remembering, really, it's remembering because it's deep within us. Remembering through spiritual practice that we belong to a greater, beloved community, and we are in relationship with the trees and the soil and the air and the wind and the waters. And so, how do we create and adapt old spiritual practices and liturgies so that we act as if that's true, and enact rituals and ceremonies and community in this more expanded way. So, for example, in a Church of the Wild, about half of the service is people going out from the circle. We meet outside under trees or next to the creek or in a park or whatever. But we begin in a circle. And there's some kind of framing of prayer and sometimes singing if you've got someone that can lead that, and poetry and storytelling and a scripture maybe. And then there's an invitation to go out and wander or saunter, as John Muir would say, and to listen and to allow yourself to be drawn to a particular other, a particular place, a particular, it could be just the wind and lay down and look up at the clouds. But to then enter into, sort of like a listening kind of reverent posture for about 45 minutes, and then come back together in community and share your experiences, share your insights, share what you noticed, what came up for you. And it's quite profound. It doesn't need a lot of explanation. It's trusting that God is in all things. And that there is a sacred presence, that this ground that we live on is holy ground. And when we take that reverent approach of listening, that God is sure to show up. And so that was what we decided to call it Church of the Wild. And then and I thought I was a little bit, just like, ooh, I'm being a little bit heretical here. But but it's just like nobody else is. What is this? Within 3 months, I started to meet other pastors who were leaving their indoor churches and sort of on the side, starting these exactly the same things that I was doing. And within, I think, about 9 months, there was a group of us, and all of us were like, wait, I thought I was the crazy one. But that's when we recognized this is a work of the Spirit. This is the work of some larger story that we're participating in versus something we're creating. And so that's kind of what Church of the Wild is. There's a whole bunch of different expressions of it in the Wild Church Network, which we ended up starting in 2016. There's people there's communities that are led by, different pastors from all kinds of different denominations. There's groups that are led by people who are not ordained, but just feel like I already experience the sacred presence in nature. And so I'm just going to do this. And we have about 2,000 people who are starting or who have started wild churches within North America. And so it's definitely something that is an emerging expression of both Christian community and outside of the Christ tradition. In fact, most of the churches, the people that come are maybe half from the Christ tradition and half not. It's like common ground is our common ground.
Yeah, in the literal sense, yeah.
Right. So yeah.
You started that first expression of Church of the Wild, and then it almost as a new congregation, right? It was something of a church plant. Is that fair to say? Okay.
Yes, so, yeah.
How long was it between that initial expression and then the beginning of the network?
It was less than a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was that just because as you started doing it, you were kind of getting overwhelmed from other people who wanted to be a part of it?
Not so much overwhelmed. I think more excited that this, like I just said, like that this is something bigger than just something that I think is a good idea. That this is actually a collaboration with Spirit, with God, and that people were popping up all over the place with very different sort of influences. So it's not like we all read the same book and went, "Hey, we're going to do this." Which I think there's more people now that I have written this book, more people are saying, "Oh my gosh, this is what I've been feeling within myself is possible. And now I see it's possible and I can do it." But at first, all of us were kind of like, "Oh, I need to do this. I don't see anything else out there, but I need to do this." And that's kind of how movements go. The first wave is people who are all over the place, not connected. But once you start connecting, it's the nature of emergence. Starting the network was just like for our own support. And eventually it became clear that this was the next phase of, a community of practice that was emerging and continues to emerge.
Would you have considered yourself a hardcore nature person before you started Church of the Wild?
Not really.
Okay.
And there are a lot of people that do. I ask a question in a lot of the workshops that I do of, tell me about the land who raised you, and people may not have ever thought about it in that way before, but they immediately know, like instantly, a tree or a little field or running around, playing in the woods immediately comes up for them. And for me, I grew up in suburbs, so nature to me was the empty lot that hadn't been built yet, or the rivers of lawn water going down the gutter were my rivers, and I'd build dams with mud, So I never went camping until I graduated from high school. It was not something that I grew up in at all. And so I didn't see myself as a nature person. I really was drawn into this theologically. My first job out of seminary was with an evangelical relief and development organization. And the whole year that I was pregnant, when my second year working there, I wrote a kit for 50,000 that was sent to 50,000 evangelical churches called "Let the Earth Be Glad." And so really it was just saying, this isn't a left-wing agenda. This is like part of our responsibility. And I felt like I was theologically approaching it. Like we're moving from like this idea of dominion relationship with the world to stewardship, it's a responsibility. And what I feel now, because that was 30 years ago, what I feel now is moving from stewardship into relationship, because stewardship is still like that mentality of we are the ones at the top of the pyramid, and yes, we've caused the most problem, and it is still our responsibility. But to think that we're going to solve this on our own is that same kind of arrogance that got us into the problem in the first place. And so it's in relationship with our place and with the forests and the waters. And that sounds a little bit like difficult to comprehend perhaps, but I think once we recognize that the natural, we are part of nature, we aren't separate, and we are built to be in relationship, in deep relationship. And once we surrender those limiting thoughts that have been embedded in our society and even in our religion, that we are separate from and dominant over, we start to recognize that the Spirit of God speaks through other people, speaks through our own heart, speaks through other beings, and to think that they don't is more of that arrogance. And so it's really our own posture of receptivity and openness to relationship that's at stake here.
So was it that theological revelation then that really kind of pushed you into personally trying to experience the divine in nature? Or were there some experiences that you had within nature where you were like, oh, this is where the holy action is?
Yes. I mean, I think it's a bit of, it all kind of weaves together.
Okay. All right.
But as I was starting to pay attention, like life collaborates with where we're being drawn spiritually. I had hit burnout in the ministry, which is not uncommon. I had also, so I had left being a pastor for about 7 years. I left going to church. I was just kind of like burnout on a lot of levels, but I didn't really like leave the tradition or anything. I didn't leave God, or it wasn't that. It was just sort of the institution, the reality of leading churches.
It was like a professional break. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And in that time, I mean, I had issues, we all have our issues. But I wasn't there to like resolve them. I was just like, I just can't do it right now. And in that time, my son, who I was pregnant with when I was doing that Let the Earth Be Glad thing, was 12, and he saw inconvenient truth around climate change and was ignited. And long story short, basically he became kind of like Greta 20 years ago.
Okay.
And so we pulled him out of school by 7th grade, and he was on the road, 2 weeks out of every month all through high school. So for six or 7 years. And we started a nonprofit called Kids versus Global Warming initially, and then it was called I Matter Youth. And so we sued this. It became my full-time job, supporting him, and did youth marches and suing the state and suing the government and all that kind of stuff. So then that was another aspect of just learning the damage, that we've done as humans in this disconnected relationship. But that also led to burnout. And so in that place of burnout, both from the church and from the environmental movement, I had sort of this experience of, and I would go to this oak tree near me, near where I lived at the church, actually. And I would just lay under her huge branches. It was like this little hidden space. And in that just surrender place of exhaustion is where I heard deep within myself, and it's not even words, but it was just like this recognition that keeping these parts of our collective reality separate is going to always lead to burnout. It's like, it's not sustainable. It's not real. It's, there's some kind of, resiliency that we have as part of nature in adapting to change and, survival and, thriving in relationship and all that, that made me start to experience what I had been thinking about. And then I had a really significant experience with a series of deer in the lower Rocky Mountains, right before right before I kind of put it together that these need to be together. And it's kind of a long story, but basically 3 days in a row, 3 different mule deer who I had encountered invited me essentially to just lay down. Like these 3 different mule deer, 3 days in a row, laid down like, 15 feet in front of me to rest, and invited me to just kind of sit there with them. And it was like this super numinous experience of like amazing and wonderful. And also just like I could feel the presence of God there. And it wasn't separate from the deer. It was included in it. And so I started to have these kinds of experiences that were aligned with the theological kind of wondering that I was doing as I was doing these wanderings more and more in relationship with the natural world, until I finally said, you know what, I think we need to experiment with this. And that's when I started.
And it sounds like a process of letting go, and to go back to that macro view, really kind of being out in nature is an invitation to let go. Mm-hmm. And you found a way to kind of make that a spiritual practice, I think, through the practice of what you have already referred to as sauntering.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, like, what does sauntering look like as a spiritual practice? What is that?
Yes. So I can't say it in French because I can't speak the language, but
Sure.
sauntering is a word. It's a French word that means like, shoot, I'm gonna mess this up, but it basically means like a holy walk, a walk to the Holy Lands, and there's something, and it's about, like John O'Donohue says, it's all about our approach, when we choose to approach things with reverence, he says, great things decide to approach you. And I found that, and it's really all about approach. So it's not, you may go on a hike at a particular place, all the time, and you love the place and it's beautiful and you appreciate the beauty, but you're still sort of like on the outside appreciating, and hiking to get somewhere, you can still appreciate it, but you're sort of, at a pace, and your focus is on getting to a place. Sauntering is slowing down. Sauntering is slowing down, and, there's some practices like crossing a threshold, like beginning the trail, getting out of your car, leaving the circle where you meet, with intention and saying, so it's like coming up to this threshold. Maybe it's a stick in the middle of the pathway, and just slowing down. And so what I'll do is I'll just go, you know what, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to cross this threshold with intention and be open to what sacred presence is here. Be open to the reality that this is holy ground. And, some people are good at, they'll take off their shoes, take off your shoes. This is holy ground. You can't go fast when you've got your shoes off. And with every step, just one of the practices is introducing yourself. It's like, hello, grass. I'm Victoria, but what I often do is a praise and blessing. It's like I'll see a squirrel and think inside my head, or sometimes if I'm alone, I'll say it out loud. Just like, blessings to you, dear squirrel. May you find all the food you need and be protected from the cars, and hear when the owls come by. Bless you, owls, that you might find food for your babies, And then there's an interesting thing, and as you start to do that, not just like experiencing the presence of the numinous presence, the reality that this world is holy, but also there's insights, it's like that owl needs to survive and that squirrel needs to survive. And our whole world is built on a reality of predation, It's like, in order for me to stay alive one day, I need other beings, whether it's a carrot or a squirrel, to offer their lives to me. Like, what a mysterious thing. And that, as I pondered that totally shifted communion practice for me. the Eucharist idea of giving ourselves to one another, like literally, as that's how life continues. And so that's part of it. It's like, this is, and another thing, another practice that I developed, I call Terra Divina. And Terra Divina is something I took from Lectio Divina, which is an ancient monastic practice that's now quite popular. And basically that's slowing down, listening to the scripture. You tell one little passage 3 different times, and you tell it slowly. And in between each time that passage is read, there's silence to allow something to bubble up for you, and then you share, like you read a passage the first time, there's silence, and everybody shares, the passage, the thing that stuck out for me was how dusty the road was on the road to Emmaus or something, and everybody has like something. And then you read it again slowly, and there's more silence, and you allow, are there memories or thoughts, or is there something coming up for you, and you share that. And then it's read a third time. And the invitation is, as this is read the third time, is this passage asking something of you? And you listen again, and then you share again. Maybe something's being asked of you. And so it's using that same foundation in reading the sacred land, And up until 500 years ago or less, I think more like 200 years, nature, the rest of the natural world, was called the first revelation of God, as the scriptures are the second revelation. And there's all kinds of saints who have stories and quotes that says, I could write all my sermons based on watching this caterpillar cross the road. And so it's that invitation. It's that invitation into direct relationship with the sacred through, just as community is with one another as humans, it's that same community beyond humans. And that shifts our way of living. It shifts our spirituality. It shifts our commitment to our place. And so, like, of all of the many, things that need to change within our culture to change our practice of using the rest of the natural world as a private resource into actual reciprocal relationship, there's a lot of layers of that. And we're not going to be able to do all of that unless it's grounded in love rather than fear. So this is really practices of falling in love, which is kind of the core, and reconnection, which is kind of the core of what religion is. And even the word religion means again, legios. In Latin, legios is like a ligament. It means literally reconnection. So there's something about humans that need practices of reconnection to remind us that we belong, in this cycle of exile and return, that we need these practices to bring us back into relationship. So that's really the core of it.
Do you find, as you look across the Church of the Wild network, are congregations or participants or ministries seeking environmental justice as a type of spiritual practice, or as a way of getting in touch with the divine in the natural world?
Yes, absolutely. It's all connected, right? Everything is interconnected. Like, we say that, and then we break it all down because it's easier to understand. You can't do everything. And so there's nothing wrong with breaking it down, as long as we remember that that's like just a way of entering in. It's not the reality, that all things are connected. And so a lot of the churches have ecological justice at the very core. It's something that they will integrate in their weekly or monthly worship services. Is to, sometimes it's activism, sometimes it's like in the church in Bellingham, we went as a community every month and did something. We'd join in with replanting trees around where the salmon come. And we'd take that extra step of replanting trees as a nice service, but to take each tree, because, it's like I call it in the book, the courtship of the particular. We fall in love with particular others, not just the world, or I love dogs. Like you fall in love with one dog and through that you love all. But, so before you plant that tree, just bless that tree, bless you, sweet tree. May you thrive and grow and get all the water and sunshine you need. That's it. But that establishes relationship. It goes beyond stewardship, which is doing the right thing. We need to take care of this land that we've cleared for agriculture and destroyed the habitat for the salmon. That's stewardship. It's important, but taking it into relationship is to say, this tree I have a relationship with. I'm going to go back and visit that tree every year. Or maybe I'll come and, bring fertilizer and I'll be sure and visit that tree. It's like to ground all of what we do in relationship makes it part of who we are versus another thing we need to do. Because it's overwhelming. It really is in this time of, sort of disillusion and unraveling that's happening in our world. It is overwhelming and we can shut down. But if we know that if we're acting in love in relationship with these others that become kin, that our indigenous brothers and sisters talk about the rest of the natural world as kin, and the ecofeminist theologists call it the kingdom of God. I love that, taking the G out, taking that old paradigm of monarchy and power over and turning it into power with, in a kingdom of God is where I feel like where we are right now. That is a foundation of ecological justice. And so it's both something intentional as well as something that happens naturally.
That'll preach. You were ordained as an associate pastor a while ago, or expressing your ordination as an associate pastor for a while. Since then, you've talked about being ordained in the wild. Can you tell us,
by the wild?
By the wild. All right. Okay. And tell us a little bit about that. Ordained by the wild.
Yeah. So, ordination means the way we practice it, within the church, is that it's like an acknowledgement of a sacred vow, a commitment to serve the to serve the church, to serve the people of God. This is and that calling comes from God. That calling comes from Spirit, and that calling comes from the community, and that calling comes from like within a lot of Christian denominations, it comes from the bishops and the hierarchy, basically. Historically, not just present, but there's something that starts back when Jesus called Peter into service. Will you love my sheep? And so a wild ordination is the same thing. It's saying that I've been called, that my calling comes from within, comes from my own inner authority, with the way that I'm made, that I honor and trust, that this sense of that I need to do this. I need to integrate my spirituality with the rest of the natural world. I need to integrate my lifestyle decisions with what is sustainable and resilient within the rest of the natural world. And that's often come from that particularity in relationship with places, with other beings within where we live, and acknowledging that this isn't something we're just making up, but this is a calling from Spirit. And so it's making room for that possibility. So wild ordination is saying yes to those callings and making that vow in a sort of ceremonial or ritual way with other people, as well as with other beings, with those others that have, that you've sensed that you've been called into service, not only for the church or for other people, but for the whole, but for the whole alive world, which is something that I think all of us, if we're honest and take the time, have been called into. So that's kind of the foundation of it.
Well, thank you for sharing so much of your story and time with us. And for folks who are looking to connect with you as a ordained leader in the movement, and for other, well, even to see where other expressions of Church of the Wild are present, where's a good spot to go to?
Yeah, there's a couple. One is the wildchurchnetwork.com. And that's where you'll see a map, and there's other churches that are starting up, and there's resources there for starting your own community. And then the Center for Wild Spirituality is connected with the Wild Church Network, and there is where we do training. So there's a Wild Church leadership training. There's a year-long eco ministry certificate program, and then both of these organizations, as well as others who are doing this kind of work, there's a collaboration in creating a movement hub through Mighty Networks that should be that will be launched this winter. So there's the Center for Wild Spirituality. The URL for that is wildspirituality.earth.
Well, again, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us, Victoria, and for giving us some ideas about how we can plug into our natural state of being and encountering the divine through that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, and also my book. You can get that online and Amazon or anywhere else. If you like to avoid Amazon, you can order it through any independent bookstore. And it's called Church of the Wild. So thank you so much, Ryan.
You bet.
It was fun spending time with you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, listener, for being a part of this. I'm ready to get into the outdoors. How about you? If you want to know more about the Compass Podcast, check out umc.org/compass. That's part of the website for the United Methodist Church, who graciously resources this podcast. A couple other episodes that might interest you include Integrating the Spiritual and Physical with guest Lisa Colon-DeLay. That was released in May of 2022. Or you might want to try Fitness and Resurrection with Aaron Roche from way back in May of 2020. And while you're checking out those episodes, hit the like or follow button or subscribe button. Thanks so much. We're back into new episode time now, so we'll have another fresh disruption for your day-to-day in 2 weeks. In the meantime, peace.